morning again, everybody. I thought we were live. It turns out we weren't, so I'm just talking to myself, but that's okay. What else is new, right? Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Stash Buster series. My name is Bradie, and I am pretty excited to be wrapping up this day-centered quilt today. You can see it on display behind me. Hopefully you were able to watch the live stream yesterday while daughter Landon did the quilting on this one over at the house. She got it finished just in time so we could do the binding on it this morning. We sat down yesterday morning and chatted quite a bit about the design that was going to go on it. I think they came up with about 30 different designs, and finally in the end they decided on some nice straight lines through all the colorful portions of the quilt, and they did some freehand feathers through the blocks, which I think looked terrific. Just a nice loose kind of whimsical feather, not too traditional, and it matches this nice modern bright and whimsical quilt. So thank you so much to Landon. I think she did an excellent job. Where are you all watching from today, and how is your weather there? We got 20 centimeters of snow overnight from November. I heard on the radio this morning, November through yesterday, we had 22 centimeters of snow in our area, and then overnight we had 20 centimeters. So we have doubled our amount of snow overnight, and it is going to keep coming. So the roads are like oatmeal here. Hopefully it's a little bit better where you are watching from. And don't forget, everybody, to share this stream with your friends. We will be giving away some fun prizes a little bit later, prizes related to binding. And I'm just going to give you a quick little sneak peek right now. You'll see me use these a little bit later to create my binding, but share the video so that you can be entered to win in the prizes. Now, if you are watching this on Facebook, I hope that you'll like our Sparrow Studios, our Sparrow Quilt Company page. And if you're watching us on YouTube, I hope that you'll subscribe to our channel so that you never miss out on any of our free patterns and tips and tutorials. Is our sound good so far, everybody? Everybody can hear me? You're all good? Awesome. Any questions yet, Miss L? Nothing yet? Well, enjoy that, you guys. Enjoy that. It's kind of nice to have like true seasons. When we were down in Houston in October, it was so very confusing to me because it was the end of October. So back home here, it was Halloween, and it's cold. It's always cold here in Edmonton by the middle of October. And in Houston, it is plus 30. So you're outside and you're hot, but it's not hot enough to lay by the pool and get a suntan. It was strange. And then the wind would come up and you're hot and sweaty, and now you're cold. And you go inside to the convention center and it's air conditioned, and now you're freezing. You feel like you got the flu. So then we flew home, and it was a difference of 40 degrees, plus 30 in Houston to, I think, minus 15 here. So that's even more than 40 degrees. A big drop, nonetheless. Matt met me at the airport with a brand new winter jacket. Isn't that sweet? He's the best. Well, I'm going to get to it, guys. I have chosen this red fabric with a tiny little pinkish dot, and those of you who know me are probably not surprised that I've gone with dots, because I do love me some dots. Now, when I cut my binding strips, I like to cut them 2 inches. I know that's not the norm, that's not the rule, but that's okay. It's my quilt, and I'm going to do what I want with it. This quilt isn't terribly thick. We did end up going with the Michael Miller Luxe backing. It is a cotton sateen, and it's just got a beautiful silky feel to it, and it's got this fun modern print on it, and I believe it's Landon's favorite, so that's why she chose it. Anyways, it did not create an extra thick quilt. We've got Hobbs 80-20 batting in there, 80 being cotton, 20% being polyester, so it's quite thin. And that's why I'm going to go with this 2-inch binding, because it will attach and come around very nicely and quite precisely. And just to get this out of the way right now, I'm not going to be hand binding this quilt. I will attach it by machine entirely so that I can actually get it finished, because I don't love binding. In my opinion, it's optional. And if you've ever been to the shop here, you've probably noticed that most of the quilts on the walls do not have binding. However, I have been recruiting several friends lately to help me out with that job. So thanks to Darcy, thanks to Sheila for all the sewing that you've been doing for me lately. You're literally saving my little butt. All right, have you heard enough of me yapping yet? Okay, so I've got my strip cutting ruler set to the 2-inch mark, and I'm going to go ahead and cut myself 8 strips for this quilt. And I'm using my ergonomic rotary cutter. Which reduces the strain on my hands. That's a good thing, so I can keep doing what I love doing. Those. Now, hopefully you've been following along with our videos and you've had a chance to download the free pattern, the Stay Centered Quilt Pattern. It is at the website, sparrowquiltco.com, and you're just going to click on my face there on the front page. Oh boy, you guys, I didn't press hard enough. That'll take you to a new page where you can enter your name and email, and then you will get an email in reply with the pattern attached. Diane says binding is the best part. Well, I respect your opinion, Diane, but I politely disagree. I don't love it. When my quilts need to be washed, that's when they get bound. Isn't that terrible? Diane asks, no need to cut on the bias. I have not ever cut binding on the bias. Sorry, I did once on something that had a rounded edge. Hi there. When you need to do it on a curve, that's when you need to do binding on the bias. But as a rule, no, I just cut my strips just straight off the bolt, just whatever width I'm going. And sometimes I want a bit of a wider binding. This is not one of those times, but if I do want it a little bit wider, then I will go ahead to the 2.5 inches. If I've put a flannel backing on my quilt, or if I've put a fireside backing, minky, something like that, then I always go thicker to 2.5 inches. But when I bring it around to the front side and I stitch it down by machine, I don't want it to be more than 1/4 inch usually, unless I'm trying to hide where I cut off my points. Then I'm generous with my binding. How many have I got there? 5. So we are streaming live here from our quilt shop in Edmonton. Seems a little quiet at the moment, but sometimes you can hear the long arms running in the background or the doorbell ringing to tell us that customers are here. We are a busy, busy place these days. 2, 4, 6, and 7. That means I've got 1 more to go. And these are 2-inch strips, just in case you missed that. I am going to be binding this quilt behind me by machine. I have done lots of hand binding, and to tell you the honest truth, maybe my hand stitching isn't the greatest. Maybe my thread is deteriorating over time. I'm not sure what the problem is, but it tends to let go over time, and then I end up stitching it by machine anyways. So I learned a long time ago to machine bind my quilts, and then I don't have to ever worry about them again. It's a strong, sturdy binding. We wash our quilts a lot at my house, so we want something that's going to hold up to our constant abuse. Is really what it comes down to. Are you all ready to go there? Okay. So now I'm just going to set my ruler aside. I'm going to show you now how I like to join my binding strips. I actually use my cutting mat, the lines on them, to make sure that I am lining things up nice and square to get that good 90-degree angle. So I will line up my first strip with the lines on my cutting mat. And then I'm going to bring my next strip along, and I usually try to be careful that I am joint. Like you can see that this piece of fabric has a white selvage edge, so I know when I look at this piece of fabric, that white selvage, that's the same side, so I usually grab the opposite end, the selvage that doesn't have any color, and I use it. And then in my mind, I'm using it continuously. I hope that makes sense. but I'm not bringing the same end again and again. Now I'm going to take this piece and I'm going to line it up on the prior piece, and I'm going to use the lines on my cutting mat to make sure that I am laying it out perfectly square to itself. Karen is asking, am I going to use a walking foot? You know, if you are really struggling with moving the quilt, I would recommend using a walking foot. I typically do not, but like I said, if the bulk was just too much and your machine was not feeding it well, that is an excellent suggestion. Now, when you create binding, you're going to sew on the diagonal from, well, I start here, so from this point into this point, and so I like to put some pins this direction. And sometimes people will draw a little line there. You can if you like. I don't have the patience for that. It doesn't matter to me if it's perfectly straight. But if it is important to you, and I respect that totally, then just take a ruler, lay it out corner to corner there, and mark it with a little pencil. The little pencil line. So I'm just going to hold those in place, and I'm going to pin through those layers. So when I'm at my machine, I can just sew corner to corner. And I am just going to continue along, pinning all my strips together to join enough so that I can bind this big old quilt behind me here. It's funny when I'm piecing it, I refer to it as a fairly small quilt, but when I'm doing the quilting or the binding, it's a big old quilt. So it is just the same little task over and over again until we get these 8 pieces of binding strips bound or, pinned together. And I do let them hang off a little bit just because my salvages are there, and I'm going to trim that stuff off. And I find I get slightly more accurate joins if I let that stuff hang off just a little bit. And it doesn't have to be 2 pins. You can do just 1. Whatever works for you. We all have our own method of doing things. I am not too strict when it comes to following the rules of quilting. I tend to do things my own way, but it's my quilt, so that's okay. Keeping it nice and flat is the key. You don't want to get any bumps in there. Okay, we're getting close here now, guys, and then we're going to sew them all together. I like the clover head pins, the clover flower head pins, because they lay flat. When I've got a pin with a ball tip, it tends to raise a little bit and things don't lay as flat. Just preference, I guess. Now this fabric, it's very clear what is the right and the wrong side. But the other day I was working with a fabric that was not as clear, and I accidentally sewed the wrong side to the right side, and I had to pull that apart. So you want to make sure as you're going through this process that you have the right sides of the fabric facing one another versus having a wrong side up. And then, of course, we're ripping things apart. And although it is inevitable, we're all going to have to rip something apart at some point in time. It's not very fun. So I try to avoid that whenever possible. All right, this is my last strip. Once I get this pinned, I'm going to set up my machine and we will get sewing these strips all together. Sandra is asking, how many strips did I cut? I cut 8 strips at 2 inches wide, and 2 inches is just my preference because I like a really nice, narrow full binding. You know, when you bring it around to the other side, it's full versus having a little bit of emptiness inside the binding. So I cut it a little bit narrower so that it is really nice and full. Oh, that is a great question. How did I decide on 8 strips? So I took the outer measurement of the quilt. It's 60 by 70. So 60 plus 70 plus 60 plus 70, that comes out to 260. I divide that by 40 in my head because I know that my strips are going to be 44 inches wide. Once I factor in the join, they're a little bit shorter. So I know 8 strips will give me approximately 320 inches of binding, which is more than plenty for a quilt that is 260 inches around. Does that make sense? I hope so. If not, just go ahead and leave a question there in the comments, and we'll try to get back to that shortly. So now I am going to kind of work backwards and bring all my little pinned corners into a neat little pile. I only did 1 pin there. Joey says, I call it reverse sewing when I have to rip out. I like that. It sounds a little bit more positive, doesn't it? I have been to a quilt retreat once, and it was almost like a punishment or an ostracizing of people that had to rip their stitches. They had to go sit in the middle of the room and in a special chair while they were ripping, and as if everybody could make fun of them while they sat there or something. Like it's not bad enough that you have to unsew. Okay, so I've got those all organized, and now when I go over to my machine, I can just pick one up. I don't have to root through the entire mess of binding strips in order to find my pieces. I'm just going to swing this baby over here and put this on the floor. Appreciate your patience while I switch tasks, everybody. Binding is such a... it requires so many different little steps. I couldn't set up for everything at one shot, so I had to do a little bit of arranging ahead of time. Now, today I am working at my my workstation, and it has an adjustable surface. Now that I'm sitting, it's a little bit too high for me, so I'm going to go ahead and lower my table down. Oh, running into something on this side. Like I said, I got too many supplies. If you've got any questions about these great tables, please feel free to ask. You'll see me using it in different capacities throughout all my videos. So if you want to check out those tables, go ahead and watch the prior Stash Busters videos and you can see the different ways that I've used it. I will be showing you a different way in a couple of minutes here again. So now I have got my sewing machine all set up. I'm using my just regular 1/4 inch presser foot at the moment, and I like to keep my stitch length at 2.2, just small enough that my stitches don't really come apart if I snip my threads, and not too small that I cannot unsew. If we go any smaller than that, it's really tough to get your seam ripper into those stitches for ripping. So I'm going to start at that corner, and I'm going to sew on the diagonal just across these strips and join them. And like I mentioned earlier, if you like to draw a line to sew on, that's fine too. At home on my other machine, I have a fancy laser light that comes out straight from the needle, or I can move the position of it, but for this I have it shooting straight out from my needle, and it allows me to follow that line while I'm sewing. For here, I'm just winging it. I can usually sew straight enough that I don't have to worry about it. Usually being the operative word there. Janet is asking, what size is this table? So the cutting mat that's on here is 24 by 36, and I have got a good another 24 inches here. So I would suggest that it's, yes, 31 this way because it can fit through a standard door, and I believe it's, so 24 plus 36 would be about 60. So about 60 inches wide by 31. Now, if you've just joined us, this is the Sparrow Quilt Company Stash Busters series, and we are finishing up the quilt that you see hanging behind me. It's called Stay Centered, and you can download that pattern off the website at sparrowquiltco.com. When you visit there, you're just going to click on my face, and that'll take you to a new page where you can enter your info. We'll send you an email with the pattern attached, and then you can follow along and make this great quilt. We will be starting a brand new quilt next week. It is going to be called Houndstooth-ish. I've changed the name once or twice. Originally, it was almost Houndstooth, and then Matt left a comment on there that said something about Houndstooth-ish, so I like that better. And since we haven't actually finished up the pattern yet, I can still play around with the name. We are almost done here. Well, looks like Maddie's going to show us the Houndstooth-ish quilt. And if you've been following me personally on Facebook or Instagram, you'll see the little pictures that we've been posting, or that Sheila has been posting of the progress. This is the original one that I did in a combination of Tula Pinks and Michael Miller fabrics. It's probably one of my favorite quilts ever. It was quilted by Kathleen Riggins out of Camrose, and she just did some really awesome work on it, and I just love it. So we are going to be starting that quilt next week, and you can follow along too. We'll have the pattern up for download on the website next week. Up for download. Okay. I didn't check my tension right off the bat, which I should do, but often do not, but everything looks okay. Thanks for holding up the quilt, Maddie. My Maddie. So I'm going to unpin all of these strips, and then I will pull them apart. Linda's asking, do I do bias binding? I try to avoid it if I can. For a quilt like this with just straight edges, I'm happy just to do a regular strip binding. If I did something with a curved edge, like maybe a double wedding ring or some sort of tree skirt that was circular and needed a bit more flexibility in the binding, I would definitely do a bias. I'm not a fan of bias. It stretches too easily, and I'm kind of a wimp, so I stay away from stuff that tests my skills too much, which is a bit of a lie. I just finished up a quilt that was entirely made of diamonds, and that went shockingly well. I was really anticipating more trouble, but it went really good. So I'll be showing you that in the near future as well. Oh, yes. There's some other, Landon is just mentioning that there is a nice tool that you can, it's like a seam ripper, but standing up, and you can just separate all your chain piecing right there, nice and easy. I don't have one of those anymore. I don't know what happened to it. It was one of my earliest tools, and well, I've been sewing a long time. It's easy to lose and misplace and break stuff. Okay, so now what I'm faced with is all these places where I've joined. I have to cut off that excess. So I am going to use my rotary cutter, and pardon me just a moment, I'm going to grab myself a little ruler, a little square ruler. Oh, I wonder where it got to. Yeah, just a little guy. I had a few of them. Oh, here's one here. Hard to imagine that we would misplace anything in a quilt shop, hey? Karen, would I talk about tension a little? Yes, I can. Do you mean how to adjust your tension, Karen? It's, okay. For the most part, I find on my domestic machine, I rarely ever have to adjust tension. When I am doing some machine quilting, whether it's long arm or domestic, there's always a little bit of playing with the tension and based on the threads that you're using. So, I mean, in our rental program here, we provide thread as part of your rentals so that we don't have to fiddle with tension. But if you're using a thicker thread or a thinner thread, then yes, you are going to have to do some adjustments. That's for sure. But I think the biggest thing is not to be scared of adjusting your tension. has been drilled in by a lot of home ec teachers not to touch your tension, and I think that's just to save them the trouble of fixing every kid's machine in class. But as adults, don't be fearful. You know, just do some adjusting and get your stitches looking good. So what I am doing at this point is those joins. There's that little bit of extra fabric there. So I lay out my ruler so that it is a 1/4 inch past my stitching line, and I am just trimming off those edges. And then I'm going to press that open here in just a moment. But it gives a lot less bulk in your binding if you remove all of these extra triangles before you go ahead and press it. And I like to use a smaller ruler for this job because the job itself is quite small, so I find it awkward trying to fit in a larger ruler when I'm doing those tiny little cuts. So I'll just lay them out one at a time. This is where I learned that patience is a virtue and that I need some. Although people say to me all the time, "Oh, you're a mother of 10, you must be so patient." It's not true. I try. I'm better at it now than I used to be. But I do believe that patience comes with practice. Okay, one more. And then when I press all these, I will not press them to one side. I usually press them open, and again, that's going to reduce the bulk in the binding. So when you're sewing through all those layers, which you'll see me do here shortly, it's going to be an easier job if you have less layers to stitch through. Okay, it looks like we've got one left, and then we're ready to press these.
This is a long question, and I don't want to write it out, so could you repeat it?
Okay.
Cindy asked, I've noticed that those who quilt don't finish the edge of the fabric with like a zigzag or a serger. Why? Don't they?
So you can go around the outer edges of your quilt top with a stay stitch or a serger edge. What I have personally found happens is that it tends to kind of pull the fabric and it doesn't lay flat when I lay it out to do the quilting. So the only time I typically do a stay stitch around the outside of a quilt is if I have maybe triangles with bias edge and I know that they're gonna stretch out. But for the most part, I try not to stay stitch the outer edge unless there's something I know is gonna be compromised because I didn't. Does that make sense? I hope so. Okay, so now I'm going to set up for pressing. And this cool table comes with an ironing surface, so I can just lay it out over top of everything and safely press now on my table. And I need to plug my iron in. See, so many steps in binding, so many little steps. I like to have things set up ahead of time, but today I just could not. Good. So you can also use the roundabout table. It is a turntable base. It comes with a cutting mat and a pressing surface. And this would be great, say, if I was at retreat and had limited space. But today, because I'm doing long strips of binding, I want to use a bigger surface. So I'm going to find the first edge of my binding, and I like to just press it in half. I've seen other techniques where people bring the two edges in like this. My personal thought is that it's more secure when I do it like this because the entire binding is now 2 layers. When you fold it both ends in like this and you press it over, keep in mind that this outer edge of your binding is now just a single layer of fabric and therefore could wear out more quickly. So I prefer folded in half like that, and then that outer edge of my binding is a double layer of fabric, therefore more or stronger, more strong. A little tool that I like to use to help me keep this folded nicely as I'm pressing is called the Sasher collection. My friend Rita from N. Jefferson showed these to me when we were out at the coast there beginning of December. So thank you, Rita, for that. It just makes your job a little bit easier as you're going along. So what I'm going to do is fold it in half, and I'm going to put it in and then back out. And that helps keep everything nice and folded as I make my way along. I'm just going to scoot it in a wee bit and do the first bit of pressing. Get that nice and flat. And then I can slide that along. And the side of this sasher is actually rounded, so when I am pressing along, it'll just push along with my iron, which I think is pretty darn slick. You can see I'm using the tip, and clearly that works as well. But it's just a little bit less effort. And whatever can make quilting easier for us is a good thing. I'm just going to keep making my way along until I can see a join coming up, and I do see that now. I'm going to lay the fabric with my join facing up, and I'm going to press that seam open. Oh, she's steamy today. Pat is asking, pressing seams open reduces the bulk, but does it weaken the join? It's possible, Pat. It really is. This is my concern when I am piecing a backing. I never press my seams open in my backing. I always press them to one side, and a lot of long armers probably ask you to press it open. But in my mind, now I'm worried, is that long arm needle going to puncture through there and sever those threads, and my backing might split open? I've never seen it happen, not once in 12 years of quilting. It's possible it could happen. Hopefully it doesn't. I've never seen it happen in binding though, nor have I ever seen it in backing. So, although it must have happened to someone somewhere, like there's a reason that someone came up with that, right? So just going to continue making my way along. This little sasher just makes everything stay folded neatly and easily. And as I go, I'm going to start putting my binding on my binding baby. And this binding baby, she's just so cute, isn't she? Do we have the small camera? Can you see her if I put it there? No? Okay, I'll just put her there. She just got a cute little painted face, and she's really just like a chunk of wood with a little split down the middle. And I am going to put my binding through that little split, and I just start winding my binding right on there. Now these binding babies aren't just good for binding, they're good for, ribbons or any sort of lace or anything that is very long and needs to be contained or stored easily. And then when I put it onto the quilt, you'll see how I use the binding baby on my machine in order to kind of tame my binding as I go along. Just makes the job a little bit easier, right? And anything that can make our job easier makes it more fun.
Is the orange thing come in different sizes?
Ah, good question. Yes, in this package of these sashers, these actually are a tool for So sorry, the question is, did the orange thing come in different sizes? In the package that I've shown you, this is called the mini set. So the two that are in here are 1 1/8 and 1 1/4. And so those are perfect for bindings. Maybe I'll take the shiny stuff off. But there's different sizes of sashers. There's a larger set as well that you can use for Quilt As You Go projects. So those are pretty cool. That's a new tool that is out by Pauline Rogers. She must be an avid Quilt As You Go teacher because she's got a little book and all these little sasher kits that were introduced at Houston. So we saw those. When we were down there, I didn't pay much attention, so I was very grateful that Rita taught me how to use it when I was out on the coast there. So I'm just going to keep going and winding that on my little binding baby. I can see another join coming up, so I'm going to press that seam open. Now, you guys, don't forget to share this video. I'm going to be giving away a set of the sasher things. What are they called? Sashers. And I'm also going to be giving away a binding baby to help make your job a little bit easier. Sorry? Ah, they're always adjusting. Adjusting the cameras, adjusting the sound.
Lots of people love that tool.
It's pretty handy. I really, really like it. It just makes it so that I don't have to fiddle quite so much. Now these binding babies, if you're the type of person that makes a quilt top and then makes your binding right away, maybe sends the quilt off to the long armor, and when you get it back, you've got your binding ready to go. These are great for storing your binding on until you get your quilt back or until you've got it quilted, however, whatever your route for finishing quilts may be. I don't know about you, my supplies and my tools and stuff, they seem to get a little bit out of control. So anything I can use to help organize myself and keep things under control is a good thing. I feel bad grabbing her by her little head like this. I would never do this to a real baby, ever. All right, so here we are at another little join. And in case you're just joining us, we are doing the machine binding on the Stay Centered quilt, which you can see behind me. I have prepared my strips at 2 inches wide, and that is going to just give me the right size binding for this quilt behind me. Now, do you see those tiny little triangles that are sticking out there? Sometimes I trim those off and sometimes I don't. Again, it's just a tiny bit more bulk in there, but it's not the end of the world if that little bit is in there. At least not in my opinion. Rolling along. I just love these dots. They are so cute. So we've got another join here. We'll deal with that first, and then we can just zip right along. We squared up the Stay Centered quilt that's hanging behind me, and by we I mean Matt. He whipped that up for me this morning. Perhaps we'll do another tutorial in the future at some point in time showing you how to trim and square up a quilt once it's quilted. I knew this binding was going to be time consuming, so I said, let's do it ahead of time. But that is another teaching opportunity to show you guys some tips and tricks. Well, I've done quite a few joins now, so I think I'm a little bit more than halfway. But see how I don't really even have to be too fussy. When I'm using that little sasher, it just makes the layers fold together nicely and really does make my job a little bit easier. So any of the tools that you see me using, you can find them on the website, sparrowquiltco.com. Along with that free pattern, Stay Centered, which you can see behind me. It is a free download, so you are welcome to download that and follow along in the fun. We decided to do the Stash Busters program in an effort to help people use up their stashes. I don't know about you, but I have got more fabric than I'll probably ever use in my lifetime. So it's nice to start using up the stuff we have, although I fall in love with something new every day and feel like I have to have it. I feel guilty sometimes. I have not done it. Nope. Okay. Rolling, rolling, rolling. Keep that baby rolling. There we go. Oh, we're getting close. I can see the end, you guys. Now, next week, if you want to tune in, we are going to start on Monday with the new quilt that we just showed you a few minutes ago, the Houndstooth-ish. I'm going to start with cutting that one out. And then on Wednesday, I have got a guest coming. She is a local quilter. Her name is Kathy. And she, in my opinion, is the stash busting queen. So I have asked Kathy to join us and bring some of her quilts. She figures she's got about 20 to show us. So I am really excited to have someone on my show that I can actually talk and converse with. It's nice that I have Landon here. She reads me the comments. Hi, Kim. And lets me know what you guys are asking. But it'll be fun to have a guest on too. So that's what we've got coming up for next week. And then we will just continue on with that next quilt pattern, the Houndstooth-ish type one. All right, that's my last join. We're into our last strip, and then we will start attaching this to the actual quilt. Matt asked me this morning, do you want me to hang the quilt? And I said, well, probably not, because I usually hurt myself or fall off my chair trying to get it down, so it should be entertaining here in a moment. All right, we are getting close. Oh, that one went a little bit off. It's not the end of the world if it doesn't fold perfectly. I like it to be nicely done, but I'm not going to kill myself trying. Now, normally when I don't use my binding baby, I've usually got a nice big pile of messy binding there off to the side. So you can see how that binding baby just kept it all under control and contained everything for me so that it doesn't get too wild and crazy. All right. So then if I had been careful, I could have left enough space that I could tuck that right in there, and then it would be good for just storing or setting aside safely. But you can see how that is a great little tool for keeping your binding under control while you are creating it. Okay, we'll get all these goodies put away. Now, remember to share this video with all your Facebook friends there. Do you know how to share a video? Underneath the video, you can see like, comment, and share. And you're just going to click that share button, and that will share it with all your friends. And that enters you into a draw to win these sashers and the binding babies. So because this is clearly beyond my skills, I'm going to set that aside and put this on here for a moment. We're going to set up the machine here again so that I can get sewing. Do cords drive you crazy too? I shared a picture on Instagram this morning of the setup behind the scenes here, all the lights and cameras and equipment that you guys don't get to see, and it feels very messy to me at times. Okay. All right, everybody. Thanks for your patience while I get myself set up. Because of the quilt being so bulky, I like to use my extension table, so I'm going to attach that now. If you've got the type of machine that recesses into your table, that's really great too, because then you've got a nice flat surface for what you're working on. Oh, thank you, Maddie. So Matt has taken the quilt down for me so that I can go ahead and attach it. Now I am going to start on the back side of the quilt. That's where I will attach my binding. And when I begin, oh, I wanted my extension table. Now you know why I don't like binding. It's just so much work. Just quit complaining and get it done already, right? Okay, here we go. So I'm going to move it over on my table so that I can have as much surface over here to support it as possible. And you can see I've got a corner of my quilt right here. I never start too close to the corner. I usually come down a good 12 to 18 inches. I want a good chunk of space before I begin. And I am going to be attaching this with a scant 1/4 inch. It's not going to be a 1/4 inch. I'm going to be just a little bit under. Oh boy. Someone commented the other day that they had left their machine in front of a heater and it had melted their machine. And I truly, truly felt for you. I understand I did the same thing, but it only got my little thread mast here. I was stitching out at the lake and the heater of the trailer was plowing down on that. It's never been the same ever since. So I totally can sympathize with your melted machine. I hope you can get that fixed up soon. It's hard when we are without a machine. It feels like you've lost an arm or something. So I like to set this little girl up on my extra thread mast over here. And then as I'm sewing, the binding just pulls off of her really nicely. And this is probably one of the best things that ever happened to binding for me, because it just makes the job easier and it helps me keep it under control, which I like. So when I go to start, I'm not going to start with the beginning of the binding. I'm going to give myself a tail of a good 12 inches or so, and then I am going to start my sewing there. So here we're going to give ourselves a good distance from the corner, and we're also going to leave a good 12-inch tail not sewn. We're going to start a little bit later in the binding. I'm going to bring that under my machine. And I've told you guys before that I'm not much of a lock stitch or back stitcher, but here I do. Because I want this to stay where I'm putting it. So I'm going to go forward about 3-4 stitches, and I'm going to go back. Okay. So today for thread, I am using Medley. It is made by Quilting, and it is just a good piecing thread. I don't know what weight it is. I usually piece with a 50 weight. I think this one's a little bit thicker, but I'm really liking this thread lately. And I've also been using the Clear Quilt Quilting bobbins, and these are both, this is cotton and this is a cotton wrapped poly. It runs well, that's all that matters, right? So here I am. I've got my scant 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I am just going to start sewing along. Now, Landon, we're going to be coming up to the corner here in a minute, and I'm going to want to be able to show a little bit closer. So let's be prepared for that, if you don't mind. As I am sewing my binding on, I will line up the area in front of me. And I have seen lots of other people come along with clips or pins or whatever. I don't have the patience for that. I just line it up as I go. I will use my left hand and I will, spread out my 4 fingers to keep things nice and straight and make sure that it stays right on the edge of my quilt exactly how I want it to. Okay, looks like we got a question here, so just give me a moment. All right. Karen is asking, why a 2-inch binding over a 2.25 or a 2.5? That's a great question, Karen. So when I bring it around to the front, it's going to be exactly a 1/4 of an inch over the front, and it will be full. I won't have any excess space at the outer edge of the binding there, and I really like the look of that. If I want a wider binding that's going to be more prominent on the front, then I will cut it wider. If I've made some mistakes and I've cut off a bunch of points, then I'll make it wider because I want to hide those errors or just be a bit more discreet. But this just allows me to lay it out perfectly, and the binding is nice and full, and it just lays really nice while I am top stitching it from the front. So slow and steady wins the race with binding. We're just going to make our way around this whole big quilt. And there it is again. It's a big one. So now I'm doing the job I don't love. I just love these little dots. They are so darn cute. I always worry that one of my joins is going to land on a corner, and the bulk in the join combined with the corner is just too much. So I'm always very hopeful that that never happens. It's pretty rare, but every once in a while you get it. Okay, Landon's holding up a question for me here, being so patient. Laura is asking, how do I feel about a rolled edge binding? My goodness, Laura, I don't even know what that is. I'm going to have to Google that and see. Oh, is that when you bring the back around to the front, like the excess backing fabric? Is that what you're talking about? I did that on my very first quilt, actually maybe our first 2 quilts. And then I went and applied for a job at a quilt shop, and she said, why have you bound your quilt like this? Then she taught me the proper way to bind my quilts. But as you know, I'm not really a big rule follower. If that's what you like to do, then do it. It's your quilt. You paid for the fabric. You invested the time. You do what you want with your quilts. All right, getting a little faster, a little braver. Now this is kind of ironic, but I've got a customer in my shop right now. Her name is Kim, and she showed me this trick years ago. When you get to the corner where you turn the direction and you just sew out the corner. So I'm going to stop about a 1/4 inch from the end. See that I got my tongue stuck out the side of my mouth just at the right angle. It helps me do what I'm doing. So my presser foot has a line where the needle is, and then it's got a 1/4 inch line in front of that. So I know when the edge of my quilt comes to that 1/4 inch line, that's where I have to stop, and I'm going to pivot my quilt with the needle down, and I'm going to sew off the edge at that 45-degree angle, and that's going to allow me to fold my binding really nicely and just get that nice crisp corner that I love the look of. Okay, so my quilt. Okay, we're trying to zoom in here so that you can see a little bit better. But the edge of my quilt right here is now lined up with the 1/4 inch line on my presser foot, so I know that that's where I have to stop. We still adjusting? I'm good? Okay, so now I've raised my presser foot, and I'm going to turn my quilt so that the corner of my quilt is pointing directly towards me. I'm going to lower that presser foot again, and I'm going to stitch right off the edge. Okay, then I'm going to pull it out from under there, sever those threads, and here is the part that often gets mixed up when we're first learning binding. So what I'm going to do is take my binding and fold it off to the side. And you can see there now I've got a nice 45-degree angle, and I like to kind of towards my needle. So I kind of finger press that, use my nails to really make sure it's nice and clean, and then I'm going to take that binding and fold it back over itself. And I'm really careful to make sure that it's lined up square with those edges, because that's going to give me a better result on the front when I flip it all around and go to start stitching it down on the other side. Okay, so we'll do that once more. I finish like this, I fold it to the side at a 45-degree angle and finger press that angle. Then I bring this over back onto itself. And again, I'm going to kind of finger press or use my nails there to just really help hold that in place. And then I'm going to turn the project and start sewing again down this side. Now I'm not going to start right at the top. I'm going to start about 1/4 of an inch in, and that'll be lined up with my previous stitching line that I just finished. So I mentioned to you that my presser foot has that 1/4 inch line in front of the needle. It also has a 1/4 inch line behind the needle. So I'm going to line up that top edge of my quilt with that 1/4 inch line that's behind my needle, and that's going to tell me that I'm being fairly accurate. So I just need to raise my needle to get my quilts back under the foot there. And the more square we are at these corners, the better the result is going to be on the front side when you turn it around. Now here I like to drop my needle and I do a little bit of a locking stitch here. Again, I told you before I don't like to lock, but this is one place where I don't want things to come apart. Have we got a question there? Am I sewing the open edge? I am, Bernie. Yes, Bernie has asked if I'm sewing the open edge. So this side is the fold. That side that I've sewn is the raw edge of the binding. Okay, so I'm going to go forward about 3 stitches. I'm going to go back about 3 stitches. But I don't want to impose on that little 1/4 inch because that's going to prevent my miter from turning around nicely. Get things nicely lined up and we'll get going again. All this drag. Okay, so you can see I get it lined up and then I spread out my fingers, and that just helps everything stay in place. Thank you. Now it's all packaged up nice so it doesn't drag. There we go. Now I really could have been using my Ideal Seam Guide here again today to make sure that I'm staying on my scant 1/4 inch. That slipped my mind, but that is a tool that you can be using to make sure that you're staying straight and accurate. Because here's the disadvantage to a 2-inch binding. If you get too wide with your seam allowance, it's not going to come around to the front very well. And that is the downside to going with a really narrow binding like I'm choosing to do. But it's my quilt. And you are allowed to do what you want with your quilts too. We're coming up to another corner, so you'll get another opportunity to see how I did that miter. Okay. Sounds good. My poor little binding baby's getting dizzy up there. I'm spinning her so much. Now, I don't know about you guys, but the most challenging part of binding for me is always that final join. Once the entire binding is attached to the quilt, I just always forget how to do that properly. So hopefully I won't mess it up today on camera, but I'm just forewarning you that sometimes that's where my brain fritzes out. Good. All right, that corner's coming up. And I am going to stop that 1/4 inch before the edge again. So I'm just going slowly and surely to make sure that I stay fairly accurate. I am now, my bottom of my quilt is lined up with that 1/4 inch line in front of my needle. So I'm going to raise my presser foot, turn the whole project. The corner of the quilt is now pointing out at me, and I'm going to sew directly off that corner. And then I'm going to just sever that thread. All right. So here we go again, guys. I'm at the corner. I've pulled my quilt away from the machine. I am going to take the binding and fold it to the right. That's going to create this beautiful little 45-degree angle here, and I'm finger pressing that to keep it nice and crisp. Then I'm going to take that binding and fold it back over onto the quilt, and I'm trying very hard to keep it nice and square. The fold is square here, and my edges are square there. Then I'm going to turn the whole thing and bring it over to the machine and start it again, coming down that other side. It does, it's so bulky. So I'm going to put it under that machine, and now this top edge of the quilt is going to line up with that line, the 1/4 inch line that's behind my needle. And I always like to start with my needle down. It holds my place for me. And we're going to go forward 3 stitches, and we're going to go back 3 stitches. And then we're going to start stitching down the side again. And remember to stay as accurate as you can with your seam allowance here. If you sway too much and get too wide, it's not going to flip around to the front nicely like we want it to. Go. Line up this raw edge of the binding with the raw edge of the quilt and keep on going. Doing okay for questions? Did Laura comment back about the rolled edge? Was that what she was talking about? Good. Okay. The big one? I don't have to worry about that camera? Okay. Thank you. Okay, I'm just going to steal a sip of my coffee. I've got it well out of the way today so that I don't throw it on the floor again. Although I hear from your comments that was quite entertaining for some of you, so I'm so glad that I could give you a laugh at least. Now when I flip this around to the front, I'm just going to choose a matching thread, and perhaps, Elle, when you've got a moment, you can choose me a nice a red thread. And I just do a straight stitch. Some other quilters that I know will do maybe more of a decorative stitch, kind of a zigzag or something pretty. I don't have the patience for that. I like to just get it done. But you could certainly do something a bit more decorative and use some of those fancy stitches on your machine. You'll see what I mean in just a couple minutes here when we get there. Donna is asking how wide I cut my binding, and Linda has asked why straight cut over bias. I find bias edges just stretch, and I'm impatient, and I pull on things, and then I stretch them and distort them, and so I find the straight or like the straight cut binding holds up to my abuse a little bit better, and that is a good thing. Just like batting. I love the 80-20 batting because it holds up to my abuse. It doesn't stretch or distort like straight cotton can. Binding, I cut my strips 2 inches wide. If I want a wider binding on the front, then I will cut it 2 1/4 or 2 1/2. Or if I've put, say, a flannel or a fireside on my back, then my quilt sandwich itself is thicker. So then I need a bigger binding to come around that edge. But I'll show you here even. When I bring this around, it's going to be just a perfect 1/4 inch on that side. So I'll have a 1/4 inch on the back side and a 1/4 inch on the front. And I just like that little binding. Sometimes if I've made a mistake and cut off my points or something silly like that, oh, my tension's bad. Then I will do a fatter binding so that it comes around better. I'm just going to rethread my bobbin here quickly because I suspect that's my trouble. Yes, yes. Sometimes we have to do that. Be like a little dominatrix of quilting and make it go where you want it to go. Settle down. It's a bit too racy for me. Okay, while we're at it, let's just go ahead and rethread the whole machine because there's no sense getting going and realizing that it's not good.
My favorite part is that they can't hear me.
Oh.
You just laugh if I go. So.
I just look like a crazy person. Okay. This is another one of those jobs where you got to stick your tongue out just right to get it to work the way you want it to. And there we go, right through the needle. We're set. Okay, I'm going to bring up that bobbin thread, and then it should be, in theory, good to go. But we will check our tension again here right away so that we don't have any further issues. Okay. Pardon me. Now, because I did sever my thread and I started over again, I'm going to back stitch at the beginning to make sure that everything stays where it's supposed to. Forward a couple, back a couple, and drop the needle. Like I said, I always like to start with my needle down. It kind of helps me hold my place, and that is a good thing. I know where I'm at, know where I'm going. Okay. Again, we're coming up to another corner. I am just really making good progress here on this binding. Now, just a reminder, you guys, if you've shared this video, you'll be entered for the draw for the Sasher little tools and for the binding baby. And if you're just joining us for the first time, then you can also find some other videos on our Facebook page, and also at sparrowquiltco.com. There is a link on the page that says Stash Buster Series, where you can go and see all the prior videos that we have done. Okay, here we go.
machine?
Yes.
Is that just on sewing machines, or can you get that for any machine?
So earlier I was talking about a laser light that I have on my brother machine that helps me stay on track. It's only on that brother machine. I have not seen it on any other machines, and I don't believe it's an add-on type of feature that you can do.
And what sewing machine do you have, just as a...
Oh, Brother 3000, I believe. It's a Dream Series something or other. Do we need to get Jay up to help? Are these ladies all looked after? Okay, so here I am a 1/4 inch from the edge. I'm going to raise that presser foot, turn it a little bit so that the point of the quilt is pointing at me, and I'm going to sew off that edge and sever my thread. Okay, so here I am at the corner again. I'm going to give myself a little bit more room to play with, and I'm going to take this edge of binding and fold it to the right. That's going to create this very nice little 45-degree angle, and I'm just going to finger press those. And please ignore my ugly little hand there. I burnt myself the other day. It's not very pretty. And I'm going to fold this binding back the other way, making sure that I'm staying nice and square with that outer edge. And again, I'm going to finger press that a little bit, hold it in place, and then I'm going to turn the whole project and bring it over back to my needle. I want this top edge to be a 1/4 inch past my needle. And I'm going to drop my needle to hold things in place. Shuffle, shuffle, shift, shift. Yeah, it seems to. Yep. Miss Landon helping me arrange myself here. So I'm going to go forward 3 stitches. I'm going to go back 3 stitches. Better check that tension. Oh, it looks so much better. Good. I'm glad I stopped and rethreaded the machine. All right, guys, are we on the last side? Ooh, 1 more corner to go, and then we will be joining. Not my favorite. I went to Houston in October looking specifically for a binding tool, and I just need it to be nice and easy and simple and straightforward because I am a fruit fly, and I've literally got the attention span of a fruit fly, and I just can't follow along if there's lots of steps. I brought something home. I still can't figure it out. I'm hoping that I can get it sorted out so I can show you guys how easy it is. Maybe it's not easy. Anne is asking, does the binding baby fit any machine? So far, I've tried it on 3 different machines, Anne, and yes, it seems to just fit on any thread spool. And because of the split in the wood of the binding baby, it's a bit flexible as too. So if your spool was a bit fatter, it would fit on there for sure. Okay. Drag, drag, drag. All right. We are so close, guys. You can see I kind of pull from behind sometimes. Don't pull too hard. You don't want your stitches to start getting too long, and you also don't want to break any needles. But just enough pressure to pull the quilt along, because sometimes this drag at the front prevents it from moving smoothly. And those feed dogs are working hard to move things for us. We want to help them out as best we can. How are we doing for time, Landon? It's 11:44. Ooh, we might go over a little bit today, guys. Oh, I'm so excited about this dotty binding. I just love it. So just a reminder, on Monday we will be starting our next Stash Busters quilt. We showed it a little bit earlier in the video. It is called Houndstooth-ish, and it is a, I wouldn't maybe declare it a beginner quilt, but it's pretty straightforward. But like I did with the Stay Centered quilt that you've been following these past couple weeks, I'll be just showing you step by step how to work your way through that quilt, and hopefully show you some tricks that will make the job a little bit easier. Okay, that's starting to move a little bit, so I'm going to adjust it. Ah, I understand. So Heather, I see your question is to please go over the sasher and the binding, baby. What you can do a little bit later this afternoon is watch this video again, and it'll be still there on the Facebook page. It'll be on the website at sparrowquiltco.com. You'll be able to fast forward in the video until the part where I do that, and you'll be able to see it again. So the great thing about these videos is they're not just a one-shot deal. They stay there on the Facebook page, and then we add them to the website, and we put them up on YouTube, and that way you can follow along. You guys, the join is at the corner. I shouldn't have even said anything. I should have knocked on wood. Too late now. All right, here we are. We're coming to the last corner. I thought there was a fly. It's trying to get me. Okay. Sorry. She thought I was hot. She's trying to air me out. All right, so slowly but surely, I'm just going to creep up to this corner. I want to stop stitching a 1/4 inch early, and then I'm going to raise my presser foot, turn the quilt so that the corner of the quilt is pointing towards me, and I'm going to stitch right off that corner, and that just gives me that beautiful little, helps me make my miter a little bit better. All right, darlings, this is the very last one that you are going to see on this particular quilt. So I am going to take the binding and I'm going to fold it to the right. And take care that you're not pulling it too hard. You don't want the angle to be funny. You want it to be 45 degrees. You're going to finger press it. And then we're going to fold that back over onto itself. Ooh, good thing we're at the end. We're almost out of binding.
I always overdo.
Me too. I've had the situation where I didn't have enough binding, and so then I had to add more strips. And of course, that's never on a baby quilt. That always happens on like a queen size monster that's, difficult to handle. So do your calculations carefully and make sure that you have got enough binding before you begin, because it's a royal pain in the butt, or a pita, if you prefer, to add more. All right, so now that I've got that folded properly, I'm going to turn the whole project, put it back under my needle, and I am moving the top edge of the quilt a 1/4 inch past my needle. I'm starting stitching a 1/4 inch late. I'm going to do 3 stitches forward, and I'm going to do 3 stitches back, and then I'm going to finish sewing. Now, I want a space between where I began and where I'm going to finish of about 10 to 12 inches. So I'm going to stop sewing about here, and then this is where I'm going to do my join between the 2 ends. And it might be smart just to put a pin there so that I am aware. So I'm just pinning where I'm going to stop sewing my binding. Okay. It's up here just a little bit. I believe it's 72 square. I don't remember. It's been a while since I made that one. But just looking at it, That would be my estimation. Okay, so I'm coming up to my ending point. So I am going to just stop sewing. And I do want to go back. I'm locking that stitch as well. I don't want it to come apart while I am working on it. And I'm going to trim my threads. Now, I'm just going to pull everything off the binding baby so that I don't have anything restricting where I can move things around. I'm going to try and arrange this nicely so that everybody can see what I'm up to over here. I want to make sure that this is nice and flat. I don't want any folding or bulging in there. I want it to be as flat as possible so that I can make it as accurate as possible. And we'll just get rid of some of these threads before we begin. So now we have to figure out how we're going to join these two strips, and there's all different ways that you could go ahead and do it. I'm just going to show you my preferred method. Could you find me a little piece of chalk quickly, please? Something that I'll be able to see. So like I mentioned, I left myself, that's probably an 8-inch space. Anywhere between 8 to 12 inches is good. And I am going to lay the binding out and then fold it back onto itself at about the midpoint of my open space. And I do like to kind of finger crease that. Thank you. Just got a marking pen here that I'm going to use. And I'm going to bring the other side and do the identical little process. Bring it forward and then fold it back onto itself. Now what I want you to note is that my sides are not touching. Okay, I have got maybe an eighth, at least a hair in between these two folded edges. I don't want them to touch. No, it's a little bit tough, so I'm trying to just hold it so that you can see it. What I find is if I let them touch, when I join my edges, I get a little bit of a bulge there. If I keep them apart just a tiny bit, it seems to be just right. So I don't know if I get a bit of stretching when I do that angled seam. I don't know what I'm doing wrong in there, but I have found that just leaving that tiny space in there makes it just right. So I hope that helps you too. Now what I'm going to do is lift my edges, and I'm going to make a little mark on those two edges, and that is going to allow me to be able to make these two pieces of fabric. It gives me kind of an orientation mark to line up when I get to that point. So I'm just marking along the side and then along the top, and I'm going to do the same thing over here. Just mark it and then mark it along this side as well. Yep, oh, it's working good. Yep, you bet. In the absence of some sort of marking tool, finger pressing them as hard as you can will create little lines in the fabric. I just find with my eyes getting younger that it's easier if I actually have a physical mark to see. All right, now at this point, what I'm going to do is fold this over onto itself, and I'm going to put a pin in there to bring these closer to each other. That makes the join much easier if they are closer to one another. So I'm just going to pin that to keep it closer to itself. And then do you remember earlier when we were joining our binding strips, one this way, one this way? We're going to create the same sort of little situation here. So the one off this side is coming down towards me, and I'm going to open it up flat. And I want to show you here, these are my little lines that I drew on there. So it's almost like a little crosshair that I'm trying to create. Then what I'm going to do is open up this one, and I'm going to place it on top of the crosshair of that piece of fabric. So those little markings are just going to line up on top of each other. And then I'm going to open that up, and I will pin across here, and I'm going to sew from that corner to that corner. But just to test and make sure that I am doing it correctly, I'm going to put a pin in to sort of simulate a seam, and then I can open it up to make sure that I've done it correctly. How many times have you sewn your binding incorrectly? About 50 million? Me too. All right, so I can see that that's going to work out properly. So I'm going to take that pin out and I'm going to pin it this way. And now my sewing is going to be from this corner to that corner. And I hope you can see that fairly well. Yeah, good. Okay. Landon's watching the camera to make sure. Do it one more time? Okay. No problem. So we're going to do that one more time for you, is okay? So this piece of binding that's coming from my right gets you a better viewpoint here. I'm going to open that up and you can see. Okay, so we're going to start over again. So I've got my opening where my binding is not attached yet, nice and flat, and I bring my binding in from both directions and I fold it back onto itself. And I really press that hard with my fingers to create a crease in the fabric. And I'm going to bring it in from this side as well. And again, I'm going to fold it really, really hard with my fingers to create a crease. This is where I took my marker and I marked on the top and the side. And I did the same thing over here, marked on the top and the side. And that's going to create a little crosshair on the binding strips that allows me to line them up to each other. Once I have that marking done, I'm going to fold that opening onto itself. I want to bring those binding strips as close to each other as I can. Okay, now my binding strip on my right-hand side, I'm going to open it up and lay it flat. So now I can see that little crosshair that I created with my marking pen. All right, hopefully you can see that too. Can they see it, Maddie? Okay, and now I'll bring over this strip from the other side, and just like when we joined our binding strips earlier, one was this way, one was this way, we're going to do the same thing here. So my binding strip on the right is coming towards me, and this binding strip from the left is going to point to my right. There's my little crosshair markings. I'm going to line them up with the other crosshair markings and pin it in place. Okay, so now I have to sew from this corner down to this corner, and then that will open up and create a nice mitered binding. There we go. All right, so now this should be my final seam in my actual binding strips. And this part always feels a little bit awkward. So if you're doing this and you think, oh gosh, this is awkward, it's okay. Everybody finds this part awkward. There we go. Okay, so that is now sewn. I'm going to trim this thread. Now before I cut off any of this extra binding strip, what I want to do is open up everything and make sure it fits properly first. So now I can see, yes, I'm going to be able to trim this extra bit off and sew along here, and it's going to fit just perfect. And I'm going to use my little thread snips for this job. Hopefully they're good and sharp, yay. This may not be the most accurate 1/4 inch, but that's okay. Not going to worry too much about that. Put that off to the side. Now, I showed you earlier that I usually press those seams open. Here, I'm not going to bother warming up the iron or pulling out the ironing board for this. I'm just going to finger press it open. And then I'm going to lay those back down. bring this back over to the machine and we'll zip up that last little bit of the binding. Landon, can you go get me a red thread now, please? Make sure that raw edge of the binding is lined up with the raw edge of the quilt. And finish that off. I will go back just a little bit. I want everything to stay where I've put it. On my hand. No, that is not a birthmark. I splashed myself with burning hot butter. I love butter. I love butter. Butter makes it better. All right, so this is your last chance, guys, to share the video for your opportunity to be entered into the draw. I'm going to give away a binding baby and a set of the sasher strips that you saw me using earlier. So go ahead and share the video now. And just a reminder, if you want to see the prior videos, you're going to look on our Facebook page, or you can check us out on YouTube, or you can go to the website and look for the Stash Busters series link on the website. If you're following on Facebook, please like our Facebook page. And if you are watching on YouTube, please subscribe to our channel. We would hate for you to miss anything. Especially the entertainment of me throwing my coffee on the floor or that sort of thing. So now I'm going to be top stitching from the top side of the quilt. So I want my top thread to be something that matches my binding well. That way if I go off track just a little bit, it's not the end of the world. I honestly am not going to lose my mind or anything. And Landon has chosen this raspberry thread for me. This is Glide. It is a 40 weight. Love Glide. Use it all the time, almost exclusively, I would say. It's pretty rare for me to use something that isn't Glide. I love it. It's fine. It's just fine. It's a nice pinky red. So we'll just thread this baby up real quick. And again, grateful for needle threaders. All right, so because we are probably going over our time, what I'm going to do is start at a corner and show you how I do my corners, because the rest of it will be just straight sewing and fairly straightforward. But let's start at a corner so I can show you how I do that, that part, because it's a bit more particular, okay? Like I mentioned earlier, I bind my quilts. When I bind my quilts, I do it by machine. I've been having quite a bit of help in the binding department lately, so I can't take all the credit. But when I do bind my quilts, I like to do it by machine. I find it to be sturdier, and I find it to be a lot faster. I'm not a fan of hand sewing. I'm not a fan of things that take a long time. I'm impatient. I want to get the job done. So now I'm at the front of the quilt, and I've got the binding, and I'm wrapping it around to the right side. And because I cut it 2 inches, it's just going to come over 1/4 of an inch. It just covers the stitching line that I used to attach it on the back side. And that's why I did a scant 1/4 inch, so that I would have enough room to bring it around and just catch it there on the top side. These are called magic clips or wonder clips or clippity clips. They come in all different sizes. Today I've got these real tiny little ones, and I like these for bringing the binding around and holding in place. So I will usually use, 2 or 3 of these at a time. I refuse to clip the whole quilt because I don't have the patience for that. I'll just clip the area in front of where I'm about to sew, and then I just remove them as I go. So I'm going to bring that around and hold it in place and clip it. Now what you'll notice with these clips is that they've got a bit of a curved edge, and the other side of the clamp is a flat. So you want the flat on the bottom and you want the curved one on top, because it will go along with your process much easier. The color in my bobbin is white.
What's white?
Yeah, I could match it to the top, but it's my quilt. If you're putting it into a show, then I do suggest doing your binding by hand, and I do suggest being a bit more matchy-matchy. I'm not quilting for show. I never will. I think my heart would be too broken if I didn't win everything, so I just want to be the best. All right, so I am clipping right down to the corner. And that just kind of saves on my fingers. Makes the job a little bit easier. All right, so now I'm going to bring this over to my machine. And I'm going to drop my presser foot. And I'm going to drop my needle. Now, the edge of the quilt is here, and I brought the binding around like this. I am going to stitch just a hair in from the edge of the binding. And I'm just going to try and keep it as straight as I can as I go. If I go off just a little bit, I'm going to stop sewing, I'm going to back up a little bit, and I'm going to re-sew again to catch that edge, because that little lip won't be secure and it could risk coming off. So I'm just going to do my best. I take my time and try to get it as secure as I can.
Is there no need to press the binding?
I have done that. Lana just asked if there's any need to press the binding around to the front. You might find it easier to control it if you do that. But again, I'm impatient and I just want to get things done. If you want it to lay a little bit flatter, then ironing it, pressing it down is a great idea. It will certainly help you. Quilt, if you can see a little bit of it's hardly the end of the world. You betcha. I am going to stitch all the way down until a 1/4 inch away from the bottom edge. All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Sorry about that. The Wi-Fi in the building just up and quit for some reason. So we're back, and I'm going to show you this corner on the top stitched binding. So I have stitched all down this side, and I have come down into the corner, stopped a 1/4 inch early, and then I took 10 stitches back. Next, what I'm going to do is bring this bottom edge of binding up and around, and I like to kind of tuck it in here to the corner so that I get a nice crisp 45-degree angle with my fold there. I'm going to use my little magic or wonder clips, or the various different names that they can be called, and just hold that in place. Helps me out a little bit. And then what I like to do is take a thin object that's usually something pointy, and I kind of tuck it in there, and that just makes sure that that fold isn't bulky, and it just makes that 45-degree angle really nice. I'm going to hold this in place with my pointy object, which today is a pair of scissors. Sometimes I use an awl or a pin or something, but it's just going to keep that little corner in place while I stitch back down towards it. Okay, so you can see that I'm using my scissor tip to hold this corner in place while I stitch back down towards it. I just want to catch the tip of it there so that I can change direction and stitch down this way. But I'm going to stitch down until I pretty much reach the tip of my scissors. And I'm just slow and steady, slow and steady, so that it stays fairly accurate. All right, now I am on the tip of that binding, so I'm going to raise my presser foot and I'm going to rotate my project. And I'll drop that presser foot again, and I'm going to sew down about 5 stitches. And I'll back stitch a little bit, back up to that corner where I began. And that is going to make sure that my corner is really nice and secure and that it will hold really well. Once I have got that in place, I can put a few clips on so that I can just start sewing and making my way down the rest of the edge of this quilt. Now, Miss Landon, would you please select a couple of winners for us so that we can announce them? We're going a little bit late today, but this binding, it's a big job. All right, so now I'm making my way down this side of the quilt and I am just a hair inside the binding. And I'm just pulling those clips off as I go. Sure. So there you can see how my corner is very nice and square, and it's back stitched really well, so that will never, ever, ever in its whole little life come out. I don't worry too much about stitching those because, like I said, this is double stitched and back stitched. It's not going anywhere. And my back is nice and mitered as well, and I have done all of this by machine, front and back. So you guys, I hope if you have any questions about binding, you will leave them here on the video. I'm more than happy to help you as best I can. Our winner today of the Binding Baby and the Sasher set is Pat Stewart. So Pat, what I need from you is to send a private message. You're going to include your email, your phone number, and your mailing address. And we will get these shipped out to you so that you can do your binding nice and easy too. All right, guys, now another quick reminder. Join us on Monday. We're going to start the Houndstooth-ish quilt. You will be able to download that off the website starting next week. If you're interested in the Stay Centered pattern, you're going to visit sparrowquiltco.com, click on my face, and that will take you to a new page where you can enter your information and we'll email you the pattern. If you're watching us on YouTube, please subscribe to our channel. If you're watching us on Facebook, please like our Facebook page. And I hope we'll see you again on Monday. And again, don't forget on Wednesday, we're going to have special guest, local quilter Kathy Strawson. She's going to come and show us all of her quilts and show us why she is the local stash busting queen. Thanks everybody for watching. I hope to see you next week. Take care and bye for now.